So, hello to everyone. So, this is going to be Gateway 63, and this is going to be for, let me check the dates. I think it's going to be for March 2nd. Yeah, tomorrow, March 2nd to the 7th. So, this will fall right around the eclipse. And the eclipse chart, I actually did the human design for the eclipse chart. The question, of course, is what did I do with it? So, oh, that doesn't matter. I have the other map. So, the eclipse chart, the eclipse will be in the same sign. So as you guys get this Monday in Australia, you're kind of already there. The sun's going into gate 63, and this particular gateway, it'll still be in the sun gateway all the way through to the 7th. As I said, that's Saturday. So this is the ending of the eclipse Shadowlands period, which is going to be after the 3rd, of course. But we're still in that kind of Piscean retrograde. And I mean, the mundane name for this gateway is Gateway 63. And Chaitan has it down as doubts, critical perception after completion, constantly refreshing your view in a world where there is always change. Your gift of critical perception needs forever tempering and attuning with its present environment. Fulfillment is attained through recognizing that ultimately everything is in its right place and order, and that no one likes to be personally criticized, even if you are pressured to comment on their lives. And the keywords here for the lower frequency being doubt in general, which is like suspicion, self-doubting, and then the higher frequency being inquiry, and the city being truth. And Chaitan's book corresponds with Richard Rudd's Gene Keys, so we'll go right into that. This week I do not have Ross' book with me. I'm away from home at the moment. And so going into directly into Rudd's kind of comments on gate 63 and this eclipse tomorrow, because it's part of these days, so I'll talk on that a little. I'm going to do a separate video though, but the eclipse will be the day after tomorrow, but we usually feel the effects a little before. Now this is the last total blood moon eclipse until the last day of 2028, and so that's pretty interesting. And so it does signify the ending and the beginning of a new lunar cycle. And that's very significant. And usually with eclipses like this, we see the markets kind of, have an extreme reaction, usually a huge downfall or the opposite or both. So watch for that in these next couple of days. But the markets have been so manipulated lately that, recently we had the attacks on Iran and the killing of the leader there. And the markets actually, I think silver went up on Friday. And then into the war actions, it kind of slid down. And usually it's the opposite. Usually it'll go up after. So just very just typical of what's been said of this year. It's with the fire horse year having been ushered in about a week ago. We're going to be seeing Uranian extremes all year. Just up and down of the markets. Very unpredictable too. And, the eclipse is a period of darkness where the sun's life force energy is not shining on us. And that's something that's important to be aware of. I like to encourage people not really to go out during these eclipses, but it depends, of course, where eclipses are visible. But even at the same time, even if it's not visible where you are, it's just a good practice. Now, gate 63 is located right here. I'll show you guys. It's on the right hand side top head center, and it's the top gate there. And then its opposite, which is where the Earth is in gate 64, and that's right next to it. No, not right next to it, but the other side. So these are collective gates in the head, in the gateway, looking towards the Ajna center. And these are both gates that are, wanting to think through things, wanting to solve problems for the other, for the collective. And in the archetype of the 63, we have the doubting Thomas. And this kind of rules the pineal gland. Now, Rudd likes to pontificate very, very, just a lot on the fact that this gate is a part of a very specific codon, obviously, as most are, but this codon is a codon of suffering. That's really interesting because all the gates that relate to this particular codon, if you guys have any of these gates do signify growth through suffering, which of course is how I like to usually think about reality, in the sense that, we don't grow except through adversity. But in this particular codon, the gates are the 36, that's over here on the solar plexus center, the 37, also in the solar plexus center, the 22, also in the solar plexus center, and the 63, which is the gate at hand right now that's transiting the sun, or the sun is transiting that gate. And so these are gates that do signify growth through suffering. And in the case of this particular gate, this doubting Thomas archetype, we have a gate that expresses in its lowest frequency a kind of doubt. And that doubt can occur, or perhaps does occur, with the loss of imagination. And Rudd gets a little philosophical about this condition of doubt. And he likes to talk about it in terms of it being the beginning and end of the human journey. And also as being an attempt to end human anxiety. And how if doubt becomes something personal and internalized, it can become something destructive. And of course, there's ways in which humans utilize these awarenesses. They either project them or they internalize them. So we can project it onto someone, or it can collapse inwardly into the self and become like self-doubt. But Rudd likes to acknowledge, and so does Ra, and so does Chaitan. I mean, it's a collective channel, it's part of a collective channel. So what that means is this particular gate is for the collective. Even if you have this gate, it is a gate that operates for the collective species, as a process of mutation. And as Rudd likes to say, pretty much the solution for these low frequencies of expression, for feeling doubt in your life, for feeling self-doubt, for projecting doubt onto others, the solution is always the same, and that's service. And service is really the solution. I mean, one doesn't need to reflect very long on the fact that when humans have problems, it's good to focus the energy away from the self and to trust that the body will take care of it. The body will heal itself. Give a body an herb. The herb will heal the body in its own way. It's not going to be controlled and manipulated to heal the body in its own. It'll do its own thing, and you have to trust that. Just like you have to trust the body's intelligence to do with the herb what's necessary, and to do with its intelligence what is necessary to find the parts and do the things so the body heals. And so service is very similar. It's allowing the body to be and do what it needs to do, and then you serve humanity. You be of support with the talent that you have. I mean, as I always say, our only obligation in this world is to share what our talent and skills are with the world. And so in this case, again, doubt, as Rudd says, is for the collective. And, one can express self-doubt and share it with others, share that experience, share that feeling, move through it, and then let it go. The danger, of course, is in, making forced or premature actions, that are reactive. Or perhaps there was another point he made that was really interesting about how people can, repress it and just make it a dogma or make it an opinion or a belief system. And he talked about how the human logical mind simply is not designed really to be certain of anything. And except for paradox. And that I really love to hear and read because, paradox is the true nature of beingness. I mean, we have two hemispheres of the mind. They each interpret reality in different ways. One attempts to rationalize, one is dependent on logical structures. The other side expresses itself through lateral thinking, which is a different way of accumulating information and processing information and intelligence. So the repressive aspect of this, as I already spoke of, is self-doubt. And what we want to do is just observe it as a mental conditioning. And of course it can be destructive like any pattern. But if we can identify it and not identify with it, but observe it and not fall into believing, whatever kind of propaganda that identification creates, then self-doubt will eventually just kind of destroy itself. It'll just, as long as we don't identify with those mental patterns, just allow them to flow through. Because really, the expression of self-doubt is just like, nothing you do is good enough. Nothing you say is good enough. You never know enough, whatever it is, however that self-doubt expresses itself or chooses to. Now, in its reactive mode, we're looking more at suspicion, and that would be in a reactive expression that's ultimately, of course, still rooted in self-doubt, but is something that can transform itself into anger and take that anger out on others. And this can also be destructive. Because once this is personalized onto others, then it's just endlessly kind of feeds on itself. I doubt this person, I doubt that person, I doubt this person's integrity, I doubt this person's word, and suspicions can, create a life of their own. Once suspicion starts, those thoughts build up energy in the body and they build up emotions. And they can be vehement or defensive or further fuel doubts about others, which, are just projections. And thus, of course, the logic will then begin, our own logic will begin to prove those suspicions. So it's the classic biofeedback loop, of human beings. Like, I mean, logic in itself is a form of biofeedback loop. It's, it's tautological. What comes out of the mind began in the mind. It's circular. The mind attempts to point at things outside of it, but that's all it can do. All it can do is point. It can't really access that. It's something in itself. It's the thing in itself, as like Heidegger and other philosophers spoke about. It's tautological. You can't escape it with it. It's just a kind of device or perceptual apparatus or recording apparatus. I don't want to get into the mind right now, or the brain, or how it works. But the point Rudd made is that it's just a loop. It's just a loop you get caught up. And in the higher frequency expression, Rudd talks about the word inquiry, the ladder of self. pushing doubt into service, pressing it into serving others. I already kind of touched on that, but he goes further and talks about the energy of remaining open without finding definitive answers, and that all pure inquiry is of great service to humanity. And that 63 is about progression through levels and stages. Doubt fuels the spirit of inquiry. It heralds the end of the logical approach, since it signifies the end of one's ability to assess life objectively. As you ascend the nature of the... I can't read my own writing there. If you enter into the holistic... No. If you ascend to the nature of life, you enter... I guess... Sorry about that. I'm not understanding my notes, but he talks about when you... I think what he's saying here is when you transform through the limits of logic, you arrive at a holistic domain of synthesis in which all opens up or increases, or increasing all things seem to affect each other. And he's talking about quantum forces there. And he says that automatically will take you back into the inner self. Now, what he's trying to say is just so boggled up, it doesn't really make that much sense, so I'm just going to talk freely on it. What Rudd's talking about, and I've read enough Rudd to understand what he's trying to get at, is, again, he's talking about the limits of the left brain and the limits of logical thought, or an understanding the world through logic. At some point, I think he quotes that famous quote by Einstein that imagination is more important than truth. And what he's getting at, of course, is that paradox is more important than logic, because it breaks down that kind of narrow frame that logic has. And because logic is something that ultimately collapses on itself. It's like a 1 minus 1 equals 0. It never quite touches reality. Thoughts are very incestuous. They're in their own whirlpool, and to get out of thoughts, you have to get into other parts of the body, into the hand that feels and touches things, or, into the eye that sees something, or into the heart that feels something, right? Intelligence moves around the body. And so I think what Rudd is trying to arrive at here is the city power beyond inquiry. But inquiry is something, as a necessary step to move beyond being stuck in personal self-doubt. I know as a 1-3 profile, I know, there's a lot of insecurity and a lot of doubt that I too have dealt with. But with little encouragement, I push on. And as long as I seem to be, affecting people in a positive way, then to me the universe is continuing the same message. Yes, move forward, continue, and then there's no reason to doubt. It's just I am, and I express and I do what my will is, and it's appreciated or not. And then you move through that into inquiry, which is just questioning without answer. I mean, there's something he actually gets into here and he actually pinpoints it exactly and expresses it. And what it is he talks about, and this is here where he gets into the city. He talks about, in a way, the great truth of humanity is that all humans are made equal in suffering. Now we know, of course, this is very relative and can be contested, and I'm sure many of us have a lot to say. But he's connecting this to certain gates. And it's, of course, a very general truth he's claiming, that doubt makes us human and leads us to a certain graciousness in how we treat others. So he's talking about the internalization of your life force to higher things and frequencies and understandings, and appreciating all the states that you come into contact along the way. But he says what always remains is the doubt about your very own existence, because all logic must cancel itself out. And then he gets into his definitions of yoga and tantra, which is really interesting because, in its simplest expression or definition, give me a second here, I lost my light. So I gotta put on a light. In the meantime, if you haven't checked already, see if you have this gate in your human design. It's a very mentally associated gate, as I was saying. It's one that is looking for the answer to something. It wants to research something, to arrive or, like do some detective work to get at the truth. But all in all, what we're talking about here is Red starts to get into yoga and how its nemesis, Tantra, expresses a certain way, a system that corresponds to the truth in the city of this gate. And what that is the way of surrender. The way of surrender is the path that is based on acceptance of what is. And the only way is the only way to get here, he claims here, is that it's a position of inner surrender. And this occurs through logical progression through time, which is how our mind operates. And it's how we learn in this reality. It's just how it goes. And then he starts going into like kind of empty tautologies, almost like koans, Buddhist koans. He's like, you become one with your own doubt, when doubt is something, it disappears into doubt, leaving truth. There's no sequential process to this. Trust is within the doubt. And this is where it gets interesting. Okay, this is what I was looking for. So Rudd makes a distinction, and he calls this the left-hand path of the right brain, where there are no maps or charts to follow other than the confusion of life itself. And even in that, truth is every step of the way. Now, this is fascinating because you guys probably hear me sometimes in my other videos talk about, and I did this recently with my second talk with Christopher, which I'll probably put out right after this video. And in that video, like, interestingly enough, Christopher does go into sequences and how astrology helps us sequence our life. And ironically, of course, human design has numerical sequences. And when you do your gene keys, it's actually a numerical sequence. And when you do your superhero profile, which is where you write out all your channels, all the statements of the channels, and you put it together and you string it, those are numerological sequences based on your gate activations in your human design chart. So you could do sequences in human design or gene keys. But what Rudd's getting at here, which fascinated me, was he's talking about how, no one's really interested in right brain processes. I mean, and that's not true to say. It's just maybe we see the majority of people are interested in left brain processes and others are interested in right. I mean, and this is hard to categorize because really there's religions are an example of, mostly left brain processes because you have instructions, you get up and you kneel at this time, you stand up at that time, or, you hold this thing or you do this thing, very instructive, right? A lot of religions and systems are kind of like that. And then you have more kind of independent outsider systems that are also left brain, like astrology itself, and human design also, because human design starts off left brain. You have to understand the concepts, the logical structure of things before you can get into right brain understanding. But really, when I do a reading for someone, I always ask them to look at the chart, to just just look at it. Before I explain anything to them about their own human design, I ask them to visually take it in, just as you right now are perhaps still looking at this screen to understand this chart for Monday, March 2nd, 2026. because you're still taking in information. There's still information being taken in intelligently through the eyes, through the visual perception, and there's just other layers. But it was interesting. I was thinking about that and the application of astrology and human design, how sometimes, you just got to put that aside and just be in life and play with the confusion. And sometimes I laugh because I think, how can people live life in the chaos and confusion that it is without a map? In astrology and human design, they are those maps. They are maps to what goes on. I mean, if someone thinks I'm in control of my reality, I don't like astrology or human design. I mean, that's, sorry, but that's not how it goes. You have some co-creative capacity, but, like you don't create your reality from your ego state. Sure, you create, your reality to an extent, a very large extent. But at the same time, reality works by patterns and sequences. And you can see those sequences play out. And we record them, and you could see how things shift and change and how reality actually operates through astrology and human design. But it's not to say you can have fun and jump into the seeming confusion of it and just ignore a chart for a while, or not look at a human design chart for a while. I mean, that in itself is a process of trusting reality. I like to do that in the sense of not always paying attention to the moon cycles, so that I'm not always impacted by them, is what I notice. And here I'm talking about the full moon and the new moon. But those are energy fluctuations, energy being pulled from us, energy moving. And so you could see that happen. You could see that stuff. But at the same time, you can also just let it be where it's at, and then you be where you're at, and allow life to kind of flow through. And, in this video, I'm more just covering the meaning of the gate. I'm not necessarily doing the transit for the week, but we do know there's an eclipse, and it's good to know eclipses are important dates. Nothing wrong with knowing about an eclipse and, staying inside maybe, and knowing that things are going to happen, and we're not going to really know what happened until later on. The usual kind of black sun kind of underworld event, and such. This is a total, well, I'll go into that in the eclipse video, but I'll stop right there. Thanks so much for listening, you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed gate 63. Very interesting. One of the final gates along with gate 64, and they're both active this week. And as you can see, we have the 4037 active, so social endeavors will be important this week, so connect with your community. All right, you guys take care.